today from Mayor Southgate for the whole meeting, from Councillor Kesh, who's I believe is going to be zooming in. Yep, for part of the meeting from 12 noon. Who else have we got?
Kesh has just arrived.
Margaret's just come on. We have Margaret and Sarah. How many are on? Can we see the whole lot? What's this called? I can't.
Sorry, only Kesh and Sarah on here.
Can you read out the ones that are on? Because I can't see just those two I can see. Yep. Okay, so we have Kesh and Sarah on the meeting.
Dave, Jeff and I will be heading away to a funeral about lunchtime today. At some point, about 12.
Sorry? Yeah, we'll be finished by then, but I think you've usurped Deputy Mayor Jeff's position. He's the, you know that little rodent in America that jumps up out of the hole to predict the start of spring? He's our version of that.
I think it's the first time I've been likened to a little rodent. But
is it?
No, it's not.
Is it not the first time?
To your face.
Not the first time.
Okay, too much info. All right. Okay, so with those apologies in mind, I'll move that they be received. Seconded by Councillor Ryan. Those in favour, against, that's carried. I did say to the councillors that if we're starting to sort of run out of time, there's things they especially want to do before they have to go, those that indicate they have to leave early, we'll try and fit that in. We can maybe have a morning tea break about that if there's anything looking likely there. Any declarations of interest? Nope. I'm just going to look at the screen as well here. Okay, we'll move on to the confirmation of the committee open minutes from the 12th of November last year. That's item 5. I'll move, seconded by Councillor Bunting. Any discussion or issues arising? If not, those in favour raise their hands. Those against, that's carried unanimously. Thanks.
Just confirm the agenda.
Sorry?
Could we just confirm the agenda?
Oh, do you want to confirm the agenda as well, on top of everything else?
Everything else.
Okay, sorry. I didn't. Who was that? Ewan. Ewan's moved. I'll second that we confirm the agenda. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Thanks. Okay, we're on to the Chair's report now. And just a word here that a lot of this will be discussed also in the PX item on growth areas, potential growth areas. But this is a sort of more general one. I'm more than happy for a discussion now as well, just bearing in mind that if we get into any specific examples, we may need to leave them for PX because a lot of those are not actually lodged as public consent applications or anything like that yet. They're just initial exploratory meetings and proposals and things like that. So we do need to be a bit mindful of the commercial sensitivity of some of those. But certainly the general issue can easily be discussed. And I have a correction to make. I got the wrong bay when I was talking about Christchurch and Bay of Plenty. It should have been Hawke's Bay, not Bay of Plenty. Somewhere over on the east coast anyway, somewhere over there. But so with that change there, I'll put that up for any questions and discussion to the floor. And I'll look out, we'll try and, sorry, we've got Māngai Ollie as well on the screen, so I'll try and look out for blue or yellow hands. What colour are they nowadays?
Yellow.
Yellow, thanks. And also have a look at this. We've got Councillor Wilson first, thank you.
Thanks, Chair Dave. Really my question, I agree wholeheartedly with your summary of what that article spoke about, and I think that in some ways was good news. My question is, although we are rapidly trying to encourage more release of land for housing, both in Peacocks and Rotokauri, most people would agree that they are possibly some of the most expensive projects and will lead to quite expensive sections. My question is, is it not time that we now start to aggressively look at other parcels of land that are low-hanging fruit, that the cost of development will be much less? We seem to have picked two very expensive in a row. And my question is, are we likely to look at trying to develop more green space which will be affordable and easier to connect to existing infrastructure?
My answer to you, and I'm going to get Jen as well and Blair if they want to comment also, because we've certainly been having that sort of discussion, is that you're right. They are pretty much the most expensive, but they're also the most ready, which has been the problem. The others, and the report in Public Excluded that identifies the others, but my comments generally say that there are plenty of places that could be cheaper if the planning tools were in place to get cracking on them, to open up those areas, those subdivisions, those new growth cells and things like that. And I mean, there's flat land, there's land with less environmental considerations, there's land that's closer to our existing infrastructure, all those sorts of things which do make them cheaper, and once you start, quicker to probably get off the ground. And that's really, the other comment I'd make is that I think Hamilton's a big enough and fast enough, growing enough city to need more than just those two difficult and relatively expensive fronts to be developing on, bearing in mind that this is only somewhat less than 50% of the growth we're talking about. The rest is infill is, I think last year, 52%, Jen, so we're still running above our current rate, so we've got all of that still happening. We're only talking about 48%.
And I've got one last question, which maybe staff could also comment on, if they could. A lot of inquiries, and probably other councillors have got them too, from members of the public alleging, that we're being held to ransom by the 6 main developers, and they've got a cartel, and that's what's escalating price. Could staff or you make a comment as to, are these other parcels of land less controlled by the main developers? And do you believe, in fact, the developers' land banking are creating this inflationary element to our land value?
I'll make a brief comment. I'm definitely going to ask management to comment on that as well. I think it's yes and no. There's certainly some of those big developers involved in there, but there are a number of others as well with potential sort of development areas that are not currently in the city. They're right on the city boundary in many cases. So it's not a clear-cut answer, and it's true that if Jen's team looked at how many empty sections there were for sale in Hamilton that sort of weren't part of house and land packages.
8.
8 at the moment, she's saying. Jen, do you want to
average
sort of
price
take it?
400-odd thousand, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I would address the first part of your question. I certainly have never seen the kind of activity that you're talking about in terms of, developers messing with the market, shall we say. What I see at the moment in particular is the developers that have land available that they can build on, they're absolutely going gangbusters. And they want to make hay while the sun is shining. The sun is shining. It is prime construction season at the moment, and there is an enormous amount of activity happening in and around Hamilton. One of the challenges that developers do have is that, let's say they own a significantly large piece of land and they can build 500 houses on it. Their ability to actually build houses at pace as one developer can be very challenging. I've had conversations with a fairly significant developer in town, and they reckon that 80 to 100 houses a year is their sweet spot, that they can actually build at pace and build really well and make sure they've got the right amount of people to actually deliver on that. Much more than that, and they get the wobbles, but they've got a few years of capacity in their area. And then Blair knows this better than me, but in terms of areas that are fragmented, that have a lot of landowners, in terms of opening a growth cell and doing a big area of development from a council perspective, it is definitely more straightforward to deal with 2 or 3 or 1 large developer in a big growth cell than it is to deal with a multitude, just simply due to the number of people that have to agree to certain things. All of this is a balancing act.
And that was one of the things that held up Peacock for years. There were an absolute multitude of owners there, and no one big landholder. And was that when that was the back was broken of that, and we got Amberfield, we consolidated some of those land holdings. Then we had someone to deal with more easily. I just wonder if Blair wanted to comment, because he's been across this sort of strategic level.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think what we're experiencing in Hamilton is not unique to Hamilton. So you look at any high growth part of the country, and it's most of the country at the moment, but certainly the metro areas, they're facing very similar circumstances to what Hamilton is facing. The comment that I'd make, just in addition to Jen, is that open up any growth area looks simple on face value, but actually it's not when you start to look into the wider considerations. And I guess we'll talk about that in the report later in the agenda. But certainly there are land use considerations, there are infrastructure considerations, there are a much wider now consenting considerations and policy framework that we have to work through. There are the metro spatial plan and the government aspirations. So there are a number of things that we have to now think about in terms of growth and development. So looking at a particular landowner who has an aspiration for their land in isolation is somewhat challenging, as Jen said, and we have to think about the wider area and what the vision is for that area and the type of infrastructure and planning that's required. So Councillor Wilson, we'll have a more comprehensive conversation when we can talk about the particular pockets, but certainly on face value, we always see these opportunities, but when you look at the greater detail, they become more challenging. So your opening comment around Peacock and Rotorua being expensive.
They are.
They are, yes. Yep. But equally, and again, equally, we haven't done the work on those other areas. But I think when you would start to understand those other areas, they will not be cheap either. So there is no notion of a cheap growth area. That's the challenge.
I guess Mr. Chair, my comment comes from evidence that I've seen where sections in Hamilton are selling for 400,000 and sections in Christchurch, which is another major growth city, the very thing that you've just articulated, are selling for 250,000. So same size, same big city challenges, just double the price. Now, how can Hamiltonians afford to buy in that scenario?
And you're straying into the speeches, which I don't mind at some stage, but...
I accept that. Yeah. Could I have my final comment, some sort of justification in light of what Blair said, that this is a common problem throughout the country? Could he explain the difference in the rising prices in Hamilton versus section prices, say, in Christchurch? There's a 50% difference. Well, 100% difference.
Not quite.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Look, I think Christchurch, certainly in the New Zealand context, is noted for its real estate prices not moving anywhere to the extent of any other metro areas. And Councillor Wilson's quite correct. And I think, from what I understand, the Christchurch and the work of the government intervention around SERA and the government intervention around bypassing a number of all the planning and RMA requirements effectively released a huge amount of supply of developable land to the market, which ultimately had an impact on pricing. So that is quite correct. And I guess some of the conversations that we are having with government officials and others, and of course government are equally focused on this very issue, the Christchurch experience is being talked about as part of their considerations. So Councillor Wilson, you're quite correct. Effectively, a huge amount of supply to the market will have an impact on pricing, and that's what Christchurch saw. And so I guess that is what the government is working with us to try and examine. How do we increase supply, but equally increase supply with all the other considerations that we have to meet in terms of the various policy statements our financial considerations, water allocation, all those sort of things that are factors in play here.
Just an extra comment I might add that follow that, Ewan, back, and you might remember 2007 or so we were having similar problems with fast growing land prices, and I remember the mayor at the time, Bob Simcock, pushing hard for us to open on more than one front to increase supply and competition and to not so much reduce but to hold prices. So that was something that was an issue at that point, and then we did, and now we're back there almost, except it's two fronts, and, which are maybe not enough. Yeah, so look, I've got Councillor Gallagher next and Councillor Maxine.
Yeah, thank you for your report, and I note, unfortunately, I didn't give you prior notice with regard to item 9, so I'll just make the note of the very excellent GM report. And I just want to tie it in because of the theme of about section prices and growth. Is there any time where we're going to have a next big deep dive in terms of what is happening throughout the whole metro area? So obviously I'm very interested in Cambridge, Morrinsville, Ngaruawahia, Te Amutu and our metro Hamilton, and I'm just running through the chair or you, GM, if we could, even at the next meeting, or actually have a bit of just get a really good close overview of what the
market intelligence on these.
Well, but also what those TAs are doing, because obviously if you're in there as a home buyer, and I'm particularly interested as a first home buyer, obviously you're looking across the whole metro area, so I think it would be really, really good.
We can touch on that a bit in the PX,
Yeah,
in the PX item this afternoon.
I think deep dive, yeah.
Yeah, but then potentially a connection into a Metro Spatial Plan update would be a good place to do that. So we'll find a space for that.
And the only other question, and I'm recalling last year with the chair, we've had this, we've had professional advice around the population growth stats in the metro. And that's, I'm just going to call it Hamilton Metro, so everyone's clear. I'm not just talking about Hamilton Urban, I'm talking about the proper metro area, which is Cambridge and Tamahiri.
It's a pity that council in 1989 didn't include that,
and unlike other elected members, I will fully admit errors where we should have woken up. I think it's tragic, and it was tragic because we left it to officers. No disrespect, they're wonderful officers, but at least we should have been more politically involved. Unlike other elected members here, I will admit past errors of judgment. But I'm just trying to, just in terms of, for example, if say we, I'm picking up Ewan's point about expensive sections and peacocks, but is there the evidence that, as supply comes in one area, then other parts of the city become more available as there's a move, transfer or not? All right, so that properties in maybe Dinsdale become available as people do a move to those new suburbs.
I don't have an answer for you on that now. I mean, there is the real estate merry-go-round when people move around, but I understand your question, and I see what we can do in terms of understanding that.
And if the previous two councils under Mayor King and Julie Hardacre hadn't pursued peacocks, what would be the state of housing prices in this city now?
That's a very good question.
Well, that's the vision question. That's the vision. If a previous council, for example, hadn't pursued Rototuna, let alone Flagstaff, what would be the state of the city house prices now?
Look, I think that some of this conversation is definitely part of the conversation this afternoon, and when we start talking about what we're going to do to update the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy so that we do have a longer term vision for where that growth will be. It aligns very closely, obviously, with the district plan changes and the national policy statement requirements in terms of what the city is going to look like long term. There's a lot of conversation, a lot of decision making for you guys to come this year on that matter.
And the final question to you and the chair is how we've had this thing around predictions of growth, of population expansion, and I'm just saying, are we not better to actually use the high end as a measure, even though if don't meet it, but it's a security, because I can just imagine the consequence, I think, of underestimating, particularly, and I say that in the context, and this is where I disagree, I think, with some people. I honestly believe that the rail and expressway will have a huge impact on the attractiveness of Metro Hamilton in terms of that greater Auckland scene.
So, what was I going to say about that? Oh, so you may recall that through the conversations we had about the growth projections in the LTP, we agreed that we would bring back a paper once we had the latest population estimates, and that is likely to be late March-ish, but certainly within the LTP timeframe, so that you can see what the latest numbers look like. But at that point, we absolutely should be having a conversation about the reality of that, as we have done a number of times, and the implications of adopting a different growth line for LTP budget and spending. But yeah, so that is will come again in the next month or so, that conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I just make one additional comment?
Yes,
Chair?
thanks, please.
To Councillor Gallagher. So you'll also be aware that this very topic is taxing the central government's mind quite a lot, and we're anticipating later this month and into March a series of announcements where the government are looking at both supply and demand potential further interventions. So you hear things such as the LVR, sort of the lending limits that banks can lend to people. You've heard talk about the bright line test, which is effectively a form of a tax on property development.
Capital gains.
So those may well be things that impact on the demand side of the equation, but equally on the supply side, there are various things that Treasury are working through at the moment, and you hear sort of whispers. And some of those supply side interventions may also have implications for councils, and so that may be around some of the things that Councillor Wilson has touched on, or other things around how councils open up more land, so to speak. So I guess we're monitoring, and we'll be working with our government colleagues on that, but it's not just a Hamilton City Council matter to resolve. Central government have a huge role to play here in terms of helping and working with us as we navigate the wider housing context.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Maxine now.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is in response to a comment from the General Manager responding to Councillor Wilson with regard to dealing with the larger developers rather than a series of smaller people. But often as we push out from the centre, we come upon the lifestyle block holders. And I wonder how we might be able to assist these people instead of having to or being forced to sell to a larger developer, to be able to be their own developers and to be able to take advantage of that uplift and the benefits that go along for them. How do we assist them in being able to do that?
Is your question, how do we assist them to be developers?
Yeah, to do their own, to get that uplift for themselves.
So one of the things that we've done in Peacock quite successfully is just significantly improve the quality of the communication that all of those people get, so that everybody is getting the same information. So if I use Peacock as the example, people who have owned property in that area have known for a very long time that development is coming and have every opportunity to kind of consider what their options are. I guess the challenge is that we, from a council perspective, we are not in the business of providing detailed planning services for other people, that there are experts in the market to do that. But there, structure plans and district plans and all of that sort of stuff, and the information that goes along with that, and making sure that everybody and not just the big end of town have access to that in an understandable way, is one of the ways in Peacock that we are really trying hard to make sure there is an opportunity for everybody. That said, property development is not a cheap business, and when you have a large piece of land, you have more scale, and so that's often why people will look at that opportunity for themselves and then decide that actually that it's more beneficial for them for whatever personal reasons to join up with, you know, a developer to create that scale.
Just an extra comment on that relating to a meeting that Ryan and I had with a large developer that owns a significant part of a growth cell, but not the whole lot. We were discussing sort of loosely with them, and they were quite keen on the concept of them doing the structure, all the preliminary strategic planning for the area, so then individual subdivisions could still happen, whether it was their own land or one of the neighbours' smaller holdings. So that there might, and we certainly discussed that in more specifically later, but that was an option that we talked about, because otherwise you can't expect someone who owns a sort of a 1.5 hectare block to do a structure plan for the entire 200 hectare sort of growth area, whereas one that owns half of it, you can probably put that expectation on.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Dave. That sounds like a much better cooperative way to be able to...
Well, it helps the big developers get theirs away if they can get the whole area approved for, and incidentally helps the smaller neighbours too. Councillor Sarah.
Yeah. Would it be right to say that the biggest constraint that we have in terms of opening up new areas for housing development is the cost of it to council and our debt constraints and our financial constraints to put in infrastructure?
That is one of the key constraints, yes.
Yeah. So how, if we're looking at developers putting in the infrastructure themselves, leading structure plans, how do we actually ensure a really quality outcome? Because with the current RMA, they're only required to mitigate the impact of that particular development, which isn't going, if they only do the bare minimum, it's not going to lead to good outcomes for the city. How do we actually ensure that and ensure we've got, for example, transport options that actually mitigate again, well, avoid further congestion within the city?
So I guess what Councillor McPherson is talking about is a new idea in terms of how do we enable developers to take more responsibility for the space. But I don't want to speak for you, but that couldn't happen without council being entirely comfortable with what is being delivered for the exact reason that you're talking about. And when I think about the way that we do things now, you know, the layering up of the planning rules and the private developer agreements and the funding opportunities that we have, you know, that is the space in which we make sure that from a long-term city perspective, the city is getting what it needs for that growth area, but that growth area and beyond. So that's what upsizing is all about, making sure that we are creating a network for the future and not just delivery for that new area.
Sarah, the last sentence of my chair's report, I raised that issue in the way we do it, and I don't have the detailed answer, but it has to be a way of setting and incentivising best practice planning and construction standards. And planning not just of the subdivision but of the area and how it integrates with the rest of the city. We have to mandate, if other people are going to do the planning work, we have to mandate the standards that are achieved, that have the outcomes for that. And that's something that the district plan can partly look at, but in the review there, but there may be other, I mean, we have a sort of best practice guidelines for road construction, for houses in some areas and things like that. And while some of them are not, we can't necessarily legally enforceable, we can push in that direction and make it easier. I mean, for instance, we are talking about the removing the developer contributions for buildings over 6 storeys in the CBD to incentivise greater intensity.
Yes. Ultimately, though, that comes still at a cost, the upsizing or incentives to council. So my question was around how do we then realistically achieve those results of getting developers to develop in a way we get the right outcomes. So I'd be interested to
Yeah.
continue this work.
That's the job we've got to do, yeah, because we certainly can't do it all ourselves, all the planning on all the fronts that people are demanding of us. Which is another comment. I think we, as a city, perhaps better using our limited planning resource to plan good infill, which is pepper potted around the city as well as the CBD, and it's much harder to get anything of scale done there but by an individual developer, whereas we can do that. That would seem to be a job more important for us to do, and some of the greenfield areas could be done by the private sector using our standards. Blair, did you want to?
I think what I'll just say to Councillor Sarah is, and we'll get further into this in detail later on, but our role is to remain in that strategic helicopter when we think about the long-term growth of this area, and the Metro Spatial Plan gives us a long-term vision. So looking at individual propositions, we need to look in that bigger context. The things that you've raised are absolutely core to when we think about the future of the city and future of infrastructure and how the city is designed, and of course, particularly where that may cross boundaries and we're having to work with the councils, there are all those issues that we need to work through. So that is what we as an organisation do, we've done for many, many years, but it's also comes down to where do we deploy our resources to engage appropriately. We can't engage everywhere. So there is a element of practicality and resourcing there as well in terms of where do we put our efforts to get those best outcomes.
Right. Look, there are no other speakers, so I'm going to move the motion that the committee receives the report, seconded by Councillor Martin got in first, I think. Heard some grunt from the side. I'm just going to say a little bit about that because some interesting things have come up. One of the points that's we really have to consider in terms of our size and our growth is Martin's point about Metro Hamilton as opposed to just the legal HCC boundaries. We're at a workshop yesterday with our transport data people, John Kinghorn and company, and the figure that I hadn't seen before, and significant, well, not the recent one, significantly larger than before, 130,000 vehicle movements a day across Hamilton City's border. 130,000, which is about a quarter of all vehicle movements daily within the city, and of that, it looked like close to half of them were from Cambridge area alone. So when you're thinking about Hamilton, it's not possible to sensibly think just about that old local government boundary. Ewan had a good question at the start about the difference between what a difference it could make if we didn't just have the expensive development greenfield areas, and certainly from the past it seems that, and in Christchurch, seems that increasing the amount of supply, the geographical and the sort of typology variations is going to help in that area, not probably help to reduce the prices, but to help to hold them for longer. And in the past, 10 years, we have been doing that in Hamilton, but I suspect if we took a one-year snapshot, it would be significantly different from our historical slow growth. It's not slow anymore. One of the reasons I wrote this is it's obvious that we don't have the capacity to do all the forward planning, strategic planning, growth cell planning ourselves. So I'm thinking, how can we rope the private sector into that, who also want to get things going, and make sure the standards are good at the same time, and keeping the 50 to 70%, whatever it is, infill going as well. Where are our planning resources best spent? And it seems to me probably in the infill area, as long as we have the standards right for the greenfields areas. So I guess that's what I'm saying is the direction of travel I'm certainly thinking of. And probably last thing is we really need to think and stare closely at that figure that Jen gave us during the answers before. Only 8 sections in the whole city of 60,000 lots, sections in the city, only 8 for sale at the moment, bare land for housing. You know, there's no wonder that the prices are That was 400,000 was yesterday, Ewan. I think they're 500 today. So that's the sort of issues. And unless we can get more available, we're going to have a worse problem in future. Oh, does the chair get dinged too? Okay, sorry, as we've got a list of speakers here. So Councillor Wilson, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I think this issue is significant and needs to, and has grabbed a lot of our attention recently. I think we've done much better than most cities, and in fact most recent articles support that, but we haven't done good enough. I'm not totally convinced that relying on other smaller towns around Hamilton to have affordable sections will work either. The data I've looked at recently, I'll see places like Cambridge, Morrinsville, Matamata, Narrawakia, Huntly, all of those properties are skyrocketing. So if we're looking as the promised land as a panacea for affordability, it ain't happening there. I think the main crisis we have is we've got 2 growth cells currently, and they will be, I think, in hindsight, the most expensive growth cells in the country. And we all know that. And we can dance around it, we can try to talk about special purpose vehicles as an enabler, but basically all that's trying to do is mitigate the fact that it's incredibly expensive. Most developers I hear, they laugh at the thought of the amount of funds we're going to have to spend to do that. The other comment I hear from developers is, in some ways, Hamilton City Council is making it hard for them because they don't, the city's position is we don't want them to develop their own bespoke infrastructure solutions. They want us to, when it comes to sewage, they want us to feed into the existing sewage, so it's we need to scale up our infrastructure. They say in other parts of the country, other councils take a view that if the developer wants to put in their own infrastructure, they can. They have guidelines, they have quality assurance, and that enables developers to move at a faster pace than council. Council may have a different position, but I think we need to look at that seriously. I know Peacocks, for the longest time, were told they couldn't develop because we couldn't manage their sewage. And there were discussions whether or not we could hold the sewage until night and re-pump it through the system. There were all sorts of innovative discussions, but the decision was nothing was going to happen there. And we shouldn't be surprised if you hold back availability, prices are going to skyrocket. I'm less concerned about our ability to manage the planning. Our biggest problem is our inability to fund the infrastructure. So I think this is a clear and present danger. I think we are becoming unaffordable and we need to break the shackles of the larger developers, and I think we need to release more land and do it now.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I think I largely agree with what Councillor Wilson was saying. When I look at council's a journey, it's always been this tension of council pays and the private developer pays, and over the last few years we've moved to the HIF loan where we've taken on that responsibility but at interest free, but it's still a huge debt. And now we're looking at the IF loan, which is sharing some of that debt. But we know the SPV model, we're still dealing with hugely inflated land costs. And I think what's refreshing is having developers now say, hey, we actually realise we need to come to the party because they're sitting on this overinflated land. So what I'm saying is I think your chair's report identifies the need for us to focus on these issues because they are challenges, and we've got to better understand what they are and how we mitigate them. I think the government needs to come to the table in terms of these value capture tools, because the land inflation is just, we're never going to be able to claw that back. The horse is already bolted. So how can we as council share some of that uplift with the building community? And I think one of the tools which I want to explore more is Community Lands Trust from a true affordability point of view, because affordable housing at 10% around the margins is not affordable housing. But taking the land cost away and looking at the build only costs, that is true affordability. So I think we've got to be really bold, but I think we have to look the tiger in the eye, and I think your chair's report and our later items will start to put these on the table so that we can actually have those bold conversations.
Thanks. So, Councillor Martin, please.
Compliments on your report and also the GM report as well, which I think both were excellent documents. I just want to say that I totally endorse and note Councillor Wilson's comments. Certainly the other towns in Hamilton Metro are not the panacea, but we do need to have a micro understanding of what's going there. So all I'm wanting is the big, huge picture of all land availability. Also, leading from that is I'm going to acknowledge Ryan, Dave and the Mayor, Deputy Mayor's crucial role on the cross-boundary committee with Waikato and Waipa. That's going to be a very important place, obviously, in terms of future potential boundary adjustments to the city, particularly in terms of potential land development. As I said, unlike other elected members, I think you do have to be honest. And back in 1989, if you look at the documents with the reforms there, the staff, in a sense, excellent way, did project growth and did, have the growth cells. I remember reading some of that stuff, think it was a bit science fiction. I couldn't, back then, imagine that, well, what's this thing way up in the farmland of Rototuna or the funny Flagstaff. And I think the danger is that but what that reminds me of is, did anyone back then really anticipate 30 years out, what this place would actually truly look like? Did anyone sort of grasp the future? If you'd said back then that we're going to demolish the Heritage Founders Theatre for a new theatre, they'd have looked at you in absolute disbelief. And there's lots of things, if you'd said back then we're going to finally have the expressway, etc., etc. So I think it's really important that we actually keep our political leadership on this one, and I'm really looking forward to the deep dive, which I suspect we're going to have in a particular item in confidential.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Sarah, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. When we're growing, we have to ensure that we get good outcomes for the wider community. And I'm not totally convinced that at the moment, as a council, we have the leverage or tools to ensure that private developers actually lead infrastructure that delivers that. But I'm really interested in furthering this conversation, because we have to provide more affordable housing for people within the city. The problem is becoming critical, and there are other factors at play, things like low interest rates, the LVRs, a lack of capital gains tax, all those things. But we have to look at what we can do as a council, and I do support the overall intent of the Chair's report. I want to just support Ryan's comments in terms of the Community Lands Trust. That's a really big opportunity for us to enable genuinely affordable housing options. And while it's not going to solve this whole crisis, because it will be on a smaller scale, it is actually going to be a real solution that we as a council can enable. The draft housing strategy has investigating inclusionary zoning as an action, but it will take more than investigating it. It will take some pretty bold steps to actually implement that too. In terms of talking about freeing up land, a lot of the discussion today has focused around greenfields, but the district plan offers us a huge opportunity to open up and unlock developable land within our current city boundaries. And that will create more competition too. So when we talk about growth, I think we have to always keep coming back to the fact that opening up land and creating opportunities for growth also includes that land within our city boundaries. And in terms of infrastructure, I just want to note the city has the ongoing obligation to maintain infrastructure and renew it. And so sometimes while developers have a cheaper solution to start with, it's not always a whole of life. When you look at the whole of life, it's not always going to be cheaper, and that's going to come back to the general ratepayer. So I think we have to be really mindful when having these discussions that we're always coming back to what is the whole of life cost of infrastructure and ensuring that it is quality, because that's our obligation to our ratepayers. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Robb.
Thanks, Chair. And look, I think the traffic movement stats that we heard yesterday are kind of another way of reinforcing that the land cost in Hamilton has got to a stage that many families are opting to buy land and build in some of our surrounding towns. And it's much higher than I thought, and I think it's still growing. And I talk to families who have built in Cambridge, and they tell me, you know, the land's cheaper. They've forgotten, of course, that the rates are much higher over there, and we'll get some insight into that when we see our long-term plan document, consultation document that compares our rates. But certainly as an interim measure, it's cheaper to build a new house in Cambridge than it is in Hamilton. Given that that number's growing, isn't it about time we asked our neighbouring councils to levy some sort of amenity rate on those on those residents who regard Hamilton as their city, the place where they work, where they play, where they learn, and that levy would take some of the cost burden off our current ratepayers. And given that that's a growing trend, it becomes more and more relevant. These councils are currently doing their long-term plans, and I wonder whether in the course of the discussions that we will have with them, that we suggest that they do that. Either they introduce a levy, or they share some of the higher rates that they are collecting off their residents and share that back with us to fund the costs that our current ratepayers are funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Chair Dave, and thanks to all the speakers who have made some really good points today. I applaud your bringing this up at this point in time, because we can never bring this up too much. Issues like, well, I'm seeing a boiling frog here. That it took us to yesterday to hear the congestion figures to suddenly realise we were congested. Anyone who's sat in the traffic for a long time will realise, hang on, we've got a bit of a problem here, but it just quietly creeps up on us. This is a very real issue that a lot of us have been banging on for quite some time, and I'm pleased to see it was validated by some good solid data. But we also have to realise our limitations and what we are here to do. It's, as I used to argue with the previous mayor, it's not just a matter of supply and demand. If we supply more land, the price is not automatically going to go down, because this is such a big banana. Issues like congestion, zero or waste, land prices, affordability can only be achieved by decent collaboration with our near neighbours now, because of the sheer scale of things. I like Rob's suggestion of a cross-border type fee or whatever it is, because it's what we can do. We've got to realise what we can do and what we can't do.
Great headline.
And it's good to talk about affordability, but affordability has to work both ways. It has to be affordable for people to purchase, but it also has to be affordable for people to develop. So these kind of conversations are excellent, and that we're just keeping our finger on the pulse. So thank you. Keep it up.
Thanks very much. That's all the speakers we've got listed. Just a couple of wrap-up comments, because I think some important points have been raised by other councillors. One, the issue about affordability in the Community Lands Trust. It might be time quite soon to get an update report from them, so we can talk about that. I sense around council there's a bit of frustration at the lack of speed. In fact, a couple of councillors have actually expressed that to me, Councillor Robb being one of them, and we were both involved in originally sort of putting that forward to council. Not in the concept, but in the implementation speed there. And Sarah raised the important point about the whole of life cost, because that is certainly one of the issues in which we faced very early on with I keep wanting to call it Harrowfield, with the light standards and the roading surface there. Suddenly, about 10 years ago, it came due to us to renew them, those costs, and they were significantly more expensive than equivalent suburbs anywhere else. And the residents were upset at the concept of having chip seal on their roads instead of smooth seal, for instance. So you have to think about that sort of thing. But I think the real headline grabber this morning, I'm fully expecting it to appear and stuff, is the amenity levy on the surrounding towns, which I think we all agree with in concept, and we'll be very interested to see the comments from the other councils and residents outside Hamilton. But I mean, it's an excellent point, which we've been the member for Tamahiri often raises a similar point, but this is quite specific, Rob, so good on you for raising that. And we'll just have a show of hands vote on receiving the report. Those in favour? It's unanimous. Thanks very much. Thank you for that discussion. And we will be coming back to that in a little bit of detail later on. So we're on to item 7, the Three Waters reform, and Andrew and Blair are giving that. And I just want to comment here that the executive summaries in this report and the next one are true executive summaries, unlike some recent ones we've seen which didn't summarise what was in the actual report at all. So thanks, Andrew, for that one.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, the topic of today's report is around the fundamental change, structural change to Three Waters. So Three Waters reform, and really around how Three Waters are delivered in a structural sense. Just want to separate that from matters which are coming to the Infrastructure Operations Committee next week, which is around Three Water regulation, the Water Services Bill and the Water Stimulus, and the work of Te Arawai. So this is about change around how we deliver the services as opposed to, I guess, the operations and the regulation around Three Waters. I'll just get Andrew just to introduce the actual changes that are being contemplated.
Thanks, Blair. So just want to point out that Mairi Porter's here as part of the team as well, but she has a commitment in the next sort of 40-odd minutes, so she will be disappearing. So tough questions early, please. So I'm not going to go through the report. There's quite a lot of detail in there, but suffice to say the government's embarked on a very ambitious reform program for Three Waters. But it's also a very ambitious program from a time frame perspective, and that time frame is set out in attachment 2 on page 71. There's been a lot of thinking happening at a national level in relation to Three Waters, and the point of this report was to try and bring elected members up to speed with all of that thinking that we're aware of and that we've got access to. But there's a significant opportunity for engagement in this reformer process in the Zone 2 meeting, which is on the 26th of March in Rotorua. So today, and the discussion and questions on this report, I suggest will be particularly useful for those elected member participants in the Zone meeting to reflect some of the Hamilton City views. And also, depending on where the discussion goes today, we can seed some of those questions or notions with officials prior to the Zone 2 meeting, if that's useful as well. So I'll certainly stop there and happy to take questions or comments or feedback.
Thanks. And just before I open up, I omitted to mention, if you look at the top of the report, Andrew's new position as Strategic Development Manager. Congratulations for that, I think. But this is the first meeting where you've appeared, I believe, with that title beside your name. Yeah. So we've got Councillor Bunting, thanks.
Thank you. Look, a really simple and quick one on page 27 of our report, talking about the investment, the financial implications. The government's suggesting that up to $710 million be available for the Three Waters reform program. That's nationwide, I take it?
Yeah, it is. That is the stimulus fund. So that's the $17.46 million that's been reported separately through to infrastructure operations. That's our share of that fund.
So is it been a contestable type amount, or is that they just decide this is your chunk and that's it?
No, there wasn't, you're testing my memory, there was an allocation framework, I just can't recall what it was based on, probably population, but don't, population. And it was only available, you know, if a council participated in that tranche under the reform, which was the data capture phase. Hamilton City did, and Hamilton City's allocation was $17.46 million.
Which is good, but I'm just thinking about the long-term plan, and there's a ratepayer going to be picking up quite a bit of that. Is this enough?
Sorry, Mark, can you speak into the
Sorry,
microphone a little bit?
I was just looking at the LTP. Is this going to cover the cost?
No, so the $17.46 million was for an enhanced investment in the water businesses around the country. The government intent behind this allocation was not to offset LTP funding decision. It was to be on top of and enhance.
Right.
But through this reform process, you know, in these documents, it signalled that there could be further stimulus packages as part of the reform program as well, in addition to this 710.
Great, thank you. I'll listen for the rest of the questions.
Councillor Bunting, next week's committee under Chair Angela will understand the progress on delivering against that program of works and how it fits in with our wider program of LTP things.
Okay, thanks guys.
Thanks, Councillor Robb.
Just to follow on from that question, I had thought the 710 million was another allocation, but regrettably it's not. Is there a promise either inferred or more direct to staff, because you've been having these ongoing conversations, that participating councils will receive more financial incentives from participating in this Three Waters reform?
So there's certainly discussions about further incentive packages, but there are no decisions and there's no detail on the table at all at this point. And I think that would be a very useful question to reflect into that Zone 2 meeting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I believe I might add to that.
What I can just add to that, Councillor, is the further, I guess, support / encouragement / incentive packages may both be in the form of financial, in terms of particularly funding to support councils as they progress through the transition process, but equally it may be by way of how those entities that are transitioning work with the new regulator. And so in other words, the regulator may take a different position with those councils than those that are not part of the process, for example. And there may be other transitional provisions around those councils that are working in the process. So I think that detail has been considered at the moment. I expect that on the 26th of March, we will start to hear some more about that, and certainly when Cabinet makes its decisions in May, that information will be quite clear. One of the things that when you think about incentives, are the incentives going to be in relation to Three Waters, or are the incentives potentially in relation to what is left for councils outside of Three Waters as well?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Like the stranded overheads.
Stranded overheads, or some other form of support for some other programs outside of Three Waters. So all to be considered.
Yeah. Okay. So the three reports from the Department of Internal Affairs, which were the Cabinet papers, I noted on trying to read through those, and they were quite meaty in places, there's an awful lot of redacted material in there. Do you have, I mean, you're working more closely with officials and the bureaucrats in Wellington and so forth, but do you think that redacting statements is hardly a way to engender a good ongoing partnership between local government and central government on trying to get some positive outcomes to what is becoming a very, very serious problem in New Zealand at the moment? And that's our waters delivery.
It's a good question.
He's got to be very diplomatic here.
Look, I think
I thought it was yes or no, but
look, certainly my experience on this journey so far is that the government have been particularly open with councils and with senior staff in terms of their thinking and their work, and certainly we are involved on some of the working parties at a national level. So they are sharing, and some of those things, to be fair, may be confidential to some of those working groups, but they are being very conciliatory, but also working together with us to try and find solutions. And if I look at that cabinet paper, that's one of the most comprehensive cabinet papers and series of decisions that I've seen in some time. So, not whilst there are some redactions, there's also a lot of transparency and clarity of thinking. So
you think there's more in that than just simply to perhaps critique why they redacted?
Yeah, look, and I don't know what specifically has been redacted.
Well, I don't know either.
No, but I think if I look through the bigger picture and the thinking, they've been very clear with us and in the information for us today where their thinking is going around timeframes, around opt-in, around opt-in versus opt-out, around potential structures, potential ownership. So they are giving us a fairly good indication of the thinking. And what I can also say is that having the cabinet decision in December means that the new cabinet, with all the new cabinet ministers, are now right behind this process. So it's not something from the previous cabinet. It is actually this new government and cabinet have come on board with it quite strongly.
So that leads to my final question, Chair, and that's around the letter that councillors received yesterday from the Minister on the Three Waters Reform Programme. And to me, it didn't really tell me any more than anything else that I didn't already know in terms of the programme. Are you happy with the speed that central government, because obviously it's going to need central government to ensure that groups of councils will participate together in this water reform. Are you happy with the speed that it's going? Because, you know, this is 5 months later than November, and it doesn't appear that it doesn't appear to me that there's anything more on the table than we already knew back in November.
Look, I think this is moving at breakneck pace. This is a extremely complicated reform program, and the more you work with the various considerations, you understand how far-reaching the changes that are being proposed are. And so I think they are, I mean, they're still holding to a cabinet decision May, June this year, and then councils making their own decisions in the latter part of this year, and they're talking about around about a 2024 start date for the new entity, which, if you think about that, is really 2 years to transition through, and of course that time frame after post-decision to start date, a huge amount has to happen. So my assessment is that they are moving at a great deal of pace, and certainly the matters that have been considered, there's a lot of thinking and work being done on there.
So when you say the new entity in 2024, is that what we might end up with, and that is a regional water company for this central, I think it's called Central Region, is it? Is that, it's not the waters reform that is coming in 1st of July.
No,
it's something much bigger than...
So if through the process councils decide to be part of a structural change, and that obviously isn't through a new entity, the intention is that the new entity, the inter-regional entity, if that is the form, will be established and operating in 2024.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks. We've got no further questions, so I'll move the staff recommendation on page 16, seconded by Ryan. I'll just note in discussion that from now on, this strategic sort of water issue is going to go to full council as part of this resolution, and that we're going to increase the reference group size to include the mayor and either chair or deputy chair of the Environment Committee as well, to broaden the scope of the overview, if you like, within the elected side of council. So other than that, nothing to say. Councillor Gallagher.
In terms of B, obviously it will come via this committee and then go on to council, will it?
No, direct to council is the result of this. But I think there will also definitely be workshop discussions and things like that. Blair's nodding to that.
Because in council, it's a different structure to a committee of the whole. Because committee of the whole, we have this round robin. I mean, I just want appropriate...
Well, sorry, we're in speaking now, so your chance to ask questions was during the earlier part.
Well, I know that the chair, okay, and speaking to this, I know that the chair is eagle-eyed on process. will be eagle-eyed on the ensuring that elected members, that we thoroughly deal with this, and I get that. I mean, I think there's a role for committee of the whole on the way to full council, frankly, in terms of, first, second reading, as I've said. I just want to make an observation in terms of our own historical experience in trying to effect reforms in this area. And obviously we were unsuccessful in our final bid, for example, just to form a shared water services with Waipa. That went down by 1 vote. I note that there's been a lot of criticism and concern around the Wellington model in terms of investment, but equally with a different model, with the water care model in Auckland, there's just as much concern around their investment. So what it tells me is that both options, whichever way you go, depend incredibly on long-term vision and long-term investment. I also note, and I think it was mayoral forums when I was with Andrew King, but somewhere I got the impression that there was a little bit of local government pushback. I don't think local government is renowned for its vision, its diversity, and I just hope, frankly, that this government will take some clear leadership in this area. And it may stray a little bit from the topic, but let us reflect on the Dunedin City Council recent issues. And what I do want, please, for our staff, as soon as we see any report or outcome from Dunedin, can we actually circulate that to all councillors? Because obviously in terms of our risk register, I'm not suggesting for a moment we will go through what Dunedin has gone through or Havelock North went through, but what it tells me in both cases, there's potentially something wrong with the current model. And if by media reports the current model in Dunedin included sort of exchange of emails which seemingly weren't read, how on earth can you go to a situation... Sorry,
Councillor Martin, you're straying well off the topic of the strategic water growth. All right, you're getting to operations.
Just briefly, I think Havelock North and Dunedin show absolutely in very succinct terms the need for significant water reform in this country. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Maxine, please.
Just in terms of C, it was just an inquiry with regard to...
No, we've done the inquiries, and that was there for people to ask. Speeches now. Normally we're trying to get it the other way round to do a question, not a speech. This time we want you to do a speech.
It was just with regard to the chair of Environmental Committee being on that group, and I'm pretty sure that that was already approved in our previous meeting. Not the mayor, but certainly the chair of...
Okay, that's a point of technical clarification. Yep. Amy, do you know what the original motion said? We'll check that. Just while we're... If we can get it up. Do you remember?
It was only in relation to the water stimulus work. It was added in the September meeting, so we wanted to be complete. Yeah. So the August one established for the work.
Look, I think... Either way, I'm not worried with the motion, because if it's already happening, then it's superfluous, that half of the point C. But so I think we'll just move on, and we'll check that. And we're not going to add 2 chairs of the Environment Committee. Okay, Councillor Robb, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. And I did have quite a lot to say here, particularly about what I sense is long delays in getting anything underway, but I take some comfort from the staff responses that things are rolling along, and it's gathering significant momentum now that we will see some fast changes over the next few months. What I am concerned about, though, is that our waters, and I think Councillor Martin alluded to this, that our whole water system in New Zealand is reaching sort of emergency. We've got a climate emergency, but we're ignoring the fact that we have got a water emergency. And every second week there is something happening somewhere around the country that's telling us that the water that we're supplying to our residents is below the quality that it should. And it's coming not only from the small councils who struggle with technology and the wide disbursement of their population, it's coming from major cities. And just driving in this morning and the gridlocked traffic from the Narrawahia residents who are moving into work in Hamilton this morning, I heard that it's going to take several months to get the analysis and effect that the lead problem in Dunedin will have on the children who have had high lead levels from the water that they've consumed in recent weeks. Auckland's no different. It's not just a supply problem of water, it's also their ageing pipes and the sewage that's leaking out into the Manukau Harbour. I hope that their Board of Inquiry extends more than just a talk fest and that they actually get their water sorted out. We're an island nation, we've got water all around us, and yet we seem to be having problems delivering good water. So I do take some comfort from Andrew and from Blair this morning that we will see some action, not only, and I think the action is here in the city, but action from central government to try and move this along quickly so that we can at least have the confidence of sleeping at night and knowing that we are supplying and we're taking away the water that needs to be taken away in an efficient and safe way. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, we're going to move to a vote. I'll do a show of hands for support. Please raise your hand for support for the resolution. And that's carried unanimously. Thanks. Thanks very much, councillors. We'll go on to the Peacock report. I propose after that to break for morning tea, or subject, and also receive the GM's report, open information reports, I should say, so that we have a clean break before we start the PX. That's the theory. See if it works in practice. Okay, we're over to you, Karen. Thanks.
So, councillors and chair, I will take the report as read and received. Andrew Parsons has a resolution in there regarding road stopping, and I'll take any questions. And I'll also provide an update on the HIF to IF process that we're working on as well.
Well, do you want to do that now? Which order? Just, it'd be handy to have a few words on the HIF and on the road stopping. Yeah, which you decide.
I will start right now, and I was just on the phone actually to Crown Infrastructure Partners right then, getting real-time updates. So what we've been working on with, we've been talking with Crown Infrastructure Partners to investigate the concept or the idea of transferring part of the HIF loan.
Just come forward, speak for the people on Zoom. Sorry, Karen.
Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3. Is that better? Yeah. There we go. So to transfer a portion of the HIF loan, housing infrastructure loan, into an off-balance sheet or infrastructure funding and financing deal. So it's not looking at a different delivery model to the one that's happening. So the team, obviously the bridge and most of that infrastructure is actually at construction contract phase and underway, and that's being led by Andrew's team. We would not transfer that across to Crown Infrastructure Partners for delivery. So it's purely a financial transfer, and the desktop analysis that we've done indicates that this could potentially apply to up to about 100 million, 120 million that we could transfer off balance sheet, which obviously would make a good impact on the debt to revenue ratio. And so that is conceptual at the moment, and that's been sent to Crown Infrastructure Partners for consideration. The idea is that once we free up that debt capacity, we can look for ways and opportunities of where that can be recycled to further invest in growth areas. So that's where it's at. It's still needs to be reviewed by, there's a lot of parties that need to look at this. Obviously we've got an agreement with MB and MHUD on the housing infrastructure loan, so it's considering that, and Treasury and Department of Internal Affairs as well as Crown Infrastructure Partners. So that is where it's at, and we're working closely with them, and we'll provide you an update once we know more.
Yeah, we'll do them in two parts. I've got a question from Councillor Margaret on the HIF situation that Karen's talked about. Margaret? Margaret, can you hear us?
Oh, I think she's on mute.
Sorry, yeah. You're on mute, Margaret? No. No. Look, Margaret, we'll come back to you. We'll see if we can get it sorted, and we'll go on with... I've got a question from Councillor Hamilton on this particular aspect, and then we'll come see if you can, because we certainly couldn't hear you. Ryan, we'll let Ryan go now.
Thanks, Chair. Karen, thanks for your report. Do you have any idea of potential time frame where we might get a resolution or any sort of feedback in terms of the quantum that is likely to be accepted in the if?
Can you ask her to text the question?
I would say in the coming months. If I don't want to overcommit to this because there is a lot of analysis that needs to be done, and due to the different departments and levels of government involved. But I would aim for this side of the financial year, so before June.
Thanks. And remind me again, our total HIF loan, was that 180?
Yes, so the Housing Infrastructure Fund is in total 290.4 million. 110 million of that is a subsidy through NZTA, Waka Kotahi, sorry, and then 180.3 is in the housing infrastructure loan itself. So that's the interest-free component.
So that would potentially leave around 60 million on our books out of the 180.
It is a little bit complicated. Blair, do you know the detail around that?
Because I assume that the NZTA subsidy you referred to, that's not on our books anyway.
Look, I think in simple terms, Councillor Ryan, the amount that if we are successful in pushing some to an IFF structure, Karen says 100 to 120 million, and that would obviously come off our balance sheet. So the $180 million loan, 100 to 120 would go into an off-balance sheet structure. I think the second part of the conversation that is really important here will be to what extent is the deal contingent upon council potentially reinvesting some of that monies into other growth areas to potentially accelerate or enable other growth development to occur at a faster rate. So there may be some of the Peacock HIF loan go off balance sheet, but it may be that council replaces that with some other debt for other growth infrastructure. That's all to be worked through in the discussions.
Which would come back to council before any year.
It would.
Yeah, just one question on that. Surely the loan with an if should be independent and not with any recommendations or stipulations that council has to do anything else. Shouldn't it be an independent loan?
They are independent, but bearing in mind this is ultimately something that's recommended to the ministers of the government, and the ministers of the government may have some requirements around any particular deal. So I think certainly, Councillor Ryan, the first proposition is there a deal to be done in terms of transferring some of the HIF loan into an off-balance sheet structure? That's the first thing, and that's what the team need to work through and make sure that is a deal that works for everybody. The second part may be that for the government to agree to that, they may say that some of that capacity that's been freed up, we would like to see that reinvested by council in the right growth areas to accelerate the provision of land for development.
Just one final question on that, if I could. It's Crown Infrastructure Partners, so do they not make the decision as a board, or does it have ministerial sign-off through that organisation?
Karen?
I understand it's ministerial sign-off.
Okay.
It's that proposer process,
Okay.
and then it goes through there. Now, the government aren't the driver for the IF loans is to enable them more homes, and so with the HIF loan, we already are doing that.
Sorry.
It's working.
Yeah, but Ryan, so I've just finished that one.
Yeah, so with the HIF loan, we're already doing that. So that secondary element to this in terms of we will commit to recycling it somewhere else to enable more housing is quite important from a ministerial perspective. And I did actually thought of the answer to your question about the remaining 60 million. So that component is the pieces that can't really go into an infrastructure funding and financing model because they might be citywide.
Sure, but they remain interest-free.
Yeah, they remain interest-free. Yeah.
And did the quick brown fox jump over the lazy dog?
Councillor Ryan, just to expand on Karen's answer, Crown Infrastructure Partners have a critical role here, and their board are really, really important in their management team in terms of, I guess, in detail looking at the proposal and evaluating it. The actual recommenders of any deal off the back of Crown Infrastructure Partners are the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. So the MHUD become important. Equally, Treasury become important here because Treasury, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, will then assess any proposal and ultimately endorse as well. So our relationships with all of those key agencies is really quite important here. And so to that extent, we are not only working with CIP, but we're also engaging with those other stakeholders to keep them appraised of the conversations.
Thanks. Councillor Margaret, this time.
Right, thank you. We all go for launch?
Yep.
We can hear you.
Thank you. I'll give us a bit of detail, point 77 on page 119. I've asked about this, no, sorry, 28. I've asked about before, but do we have a system? Planting trees and plants is significant for a whole lot of reasons, as we know. And my question is, are we keeping count of plants, whether they be trees or especially trees, or smaller plants across our organisations, so that, you know, in a gross cell, you can see we've planted 17,000 to date, but are we correlating that with other plantings that we've made in gullies, that we've made on the sides of the road, that we've planted along expressways, etc., etc.?
Thanks, Councillor Margaret. So that is a good question. I would defer that question to probably Maria Barry or someone in the Parks team who looks after that at a citywide level. But I can speak to Peacock in that we are tracking that at that growth cell level. But perhaps I can note that down to have a conversation with Maria Barry about that.
And I take it Maria's not there?
No. No.
Yes, look, I really appreciate that. As I said, I've mentioned it before, but it's, you know, when it comes back to reporting, if you can say, look, we've planted 17,000 trees to date, and as part of our whole of city contribution, it's, I don't know, 20% of what the city's planted thus far. And I just think that gives us, because there are many people that are really keen and really want us to be planting more trees, particularly natives. So I think it's really important that we keep track so that we can report back on how well or how not so well we're doing.
Thanks. Councillor Rob.
Thank you. I'll just go back to the Hiflin
Yep.
and apart obviously from the immediate benefit of reducing our debt to revenue ratio or improving it, we would also lose the benefit of the, when I say we, that's the community, because presumably there will be interest built into the Crown Infrastructure loan. We will lose the benefit, the community will lose the benefit of the interest-free loan on the interest-free HIF loan.
I understand from our early conversations, and that's a key part of this proposal as well, is that we wanted to retain that. So
we'll get some, if you like, arithmetic analysis before a decision's made.
Absolutely. Yeah. There will be a lot of thinking that goes into this.
Okay. So the last question is, given that sections at existing or current sections at Peacock may have already been priced, how do we get an assurance to those who buy a section and inherit a Crown Infrastructure loan on their property are paying a price that reflects the debt that they will have to repay beyond the purchase date?
It's a very good question, and that will also be something that's
we'll get in the
analysed
analysis
as part of the commercial and community financial strategy in there.
Okay, all right. So that's a work in progress at the moment, and it will come back to us in clear and easy to understand information.
I hope so. Enjoyable too, I hope.
Oh, okay.
So we're really at the moment trying to get the concept across the line.
Yeah,
so because it's a little bit different to.
Yeah, no, I can understand it's innovative and
Yep.
new, and yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Roll, can I just add to something Karen said? I mean, obviously, foundation to this is interest-free portion of the HIF loan transferring across, but equally, it may be that is not the proposition, and we'll have to consider that. What I would say to that is the gap between zero interest and what the interest rates are at the moment is relatively small. So it may be that if that is a part of the deal, the hurdle is not so significant.
I understand that, but of course that's only the current position, isn't it? If interest rates did change,
Correct.
Then of course the difference could be, I think, the 70 million that Mayor Andrew previously touted through the media as being the benefit of the HIF loan.
And I think that's part of the reason why we want to move quickly here while interest rates environment is particularly low. And you'll know from the Auckland structure, they acquired a 35-year fixed interest deal as part of that. So I think that will be all part of the detail to work through.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Thanks. Just a word to everyone, staff included. We're starting to get into quite lengthy answers to the not the questions, and as well as some speeches as part of the questions. So, not that this, just a warning, not that this is anything to do with the next questioner, which is Councillor Martin.
I said, I know I'm a good role model for brevity, but the issue, I just wanted to query, mine non-financial in nature. Do you want to hold that as a separate tranche of questions?
Well, we were trying to question Karen on the if situation.
Okay, so
I will come back at the end. I should have mentioned
Thank
this
you.
before to wrap up questions on other issues.
Yeah, a couple of wrap-ups, that's all.
Yeah, because we've also got the road stopping to do. So you go back on the list, Martin, for later. Thanks. Sarah? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Karen, thanks for the update. One of the questions I had was just in regard to the BAT management plan, the progress is excruciatingly slow from what I've seen. How do we get things moving on that?
Okay, so that I agree with the progress.
Yeah.
However, we have started to take action in the growth area. So, as you know, there is a lot of data that we need to understand in the area around bats. And what we've seen through the Amberfield consenting process is that, you kind of want to have 2 years data before you develop in there. And so what we've done, we're not waiting for a bat management strategy to be in place. We've been actively engaging with developers in the area. The consenting team have developed a set of guidelines for what monitoring looks like, and we've been passing those to developers, and they've actually started monitoring bats in the area, which is a really positive outcome, because they know they need it to be ready in 2023 when their developments can start. But also B, we can collect that data and actually get a good picture which can inform that management strategy. So we are taking action.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can see that I significantly failed to get my point across about what we were questioning on.
Oh, right, sorry.
We are questioning only at the moment on the if situation, the finances associated with that.
All right.
We will come back to the general ones later.
Sorry.
Is that clear to everyone, please?
Yeah. I missed that.
You're listening, great. So, Councillor Bunting, did you get the message?
I did, thank you, Dave, and I will wait.
Excellent. Sorry. Okay. And Kesh is also withdrawn, so I think that we have got the message across now. We're going to do the road stopping now, then we're going to come to any other questions that are outside those particular specific things. The reason we're doing that is because there's some specific resolution things involved there. So, Andrew, would you like to explain the road stopping proposal?
Sure, and I'll endeavour to delight you with brevity. So the road stopping, which is clearly shown in attachment 2, page 127, that's largely procedural. So the road, that's an unformed public road, so it's just grass, and it's unhelpful to us in the context of the agreed infrastructure networks in the area. So we have a proposal in the resolution to stop areas A, C and E across that
Sorry, can we just
corridor.
check that page number? Because it's not 137 on...
127, sorry, did I say 127?
127, my apologies. Thank you.
So it's the orange, the green and the very light blue at the end. A, C and E they've never been formed, they don't form part of the future network. This proposal has nothing to do with the disposal of that land. That will come back at a later date because there's integration opportunities with other things with that land, but it's important at this point in the process that we legally stop the road to remove that road classification, at which point those pieces of land become private titles. So that's the resolution, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, questions on that alone? Martin's waiting, no, Bunty's waiting, excellent. All right, thanks for that, Andrew. We'll do that in the motion. Now, we've got wrap-up questions from Councillor Martin, Councillor Mark and Councillor Kesh. And Councillor Sarah. I thought you'd already had your wrap-up question. Martin, thank you.
Just on the schools issue, and that's item 4, Roman numerals 14 and 15 with regard to the consultation for Melville High and Intermediate Schools, 2 new sites in Peacocks, and also the Kindergarten Association actively looking for land for a much needed preschool. Can you give us an update of what our involvement is in those 2 issues? I know some 2 councillors are involved in the, I think Councillor Bunting and Thompson McPherson have had an interaction on this issue.
On the Melville High, Melville Intermediate...
Well, just the general, where we're at about education provision in that area, including the Melville High upgrade.
Yeah, the Melville High, Melville Intermediate situation is that I believe they've done a recommendation that's with the Minister, so they're waiting to hear back in terms of what that looks like. I think it's the recommendation was the integrated approach schooling in that area, so blending the 2 schools. With regards to the team in Ministry of Education that's looking for school sites for the 2 primary schools in the area, so they're currently progressing, starting work on what's called notice of requirement to start to protect that land for schooling in the northern area, near where the sports park is planned to go, so that's good. And they're just continuing with the acquisition process for the southern school site, which, valuations and negotiations with the landowner, etc. Kindergartens, so the Waikato Kindergarten Association Chief Executive has been really looking for land to put a facility in the area, and it's been really challenging for them to find land because, as you know, it's not included in school sites anymore, etc. So it's quite challenging. So they see themselves as an intergenerational community amenity facility for early education, but there's also a lot of competition out there as well in terms of private.
Because they're a public group, they're not a private enterprise, and we've got a social democratic government.
And you've got a question?
Yes, the question is, can we work with the Minister of Education and the Minister to get them to review the fact that the 2 primary school sites, that there could be provision made for an early childhood centre? Now, there may be a process of who gets that, but can we do that? Or can we make it clear that we think that's a priority? That logically, why would you not put a kindergarten preschool attached to a primary school site?
Would that be a decision for this committee to?
Well, I'd be happy to move
How
the
would that
relevant.
work?
Look, I mean, if you come, I don't want to do this on the hoof, and it could be you come back to us and say if we need a resolution.
Perhaps as part of a workshop we could have a rundown on the community facilities and educational facilities that are the latest on them in Peacocks, Karen. So we can actually have a discussion about that before anything goes too much further legally
And
speaking.
certainly our relationship with the two primary schools, we will ban fences, fields being fenced off. This is green fields. This is an opportunity to do it right. So if we can just pick that up, that'd be fine. Look, the other question was on item 59, Amberfield. There's an appeal with regard to a sports field. Can you succinctly clarify that? The Independent Commission has included the Southern Sports Park, and this has been appealed by the applicant. What's that?
So that's part of the Amberfield resource consent process, where the 7 hectares, I believe, of land was included in their consent application, and the applicant, which is Western Lee, see that as essentially they want to put housing on that land. So they've appealed that, and that's being worked through in the Environment Court process.
So basically the council sees a need for a sports field in that area?
Under the current structure plan, that's where the sports park is located, in that area.
And the developer wants to put houses on the sports park?
That is most likely why they've appealed that matter. So it's being worked through in the Environment Court at the moment.
Will that come back to us at some stage, given that we've taken a stance in support of our growth cell at this point? Our structure plan?
I might pass this over to Luke O'Dwyer if he's here, because he knows the ins and outs of the consenting process. Is that something you could answer?
Luke? Oh, he's hiding behind there.
You might need to come to
Yeah,
the
just
microphone.
just on that, come close to a mic if you can, Luke, thanks, somewhere.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me? Sorry. Yep. Karen's right. It's a matter that's under appeal, but as I understand, it's also part of the private development agreement negotiations around the contributions that the Western Lee Group at DARE need to make to council around the provision of infrastructure. So it's caught up in two processes. One is the appeal. The other one is then how it plays out through a commercial negotiation. And I suspect that that's something we'd probably want to talk about in a PX environment, not in open, because of the nature of those conversations.
Yeah, I'll be happy to hold that over.
Okay.
Just on that, so there is a private development agreement discussion underway with Amberfield, just because there are significant integration and touch points between what the city's doing and what they're doing, and in that negotiation there is significant opportunities for both parties, but it's very early days. There's another continued discussion with them scheduled for tomorrow. Any outcome in that space will absolutely be coming back to this committee for consideration and approval, but it potentially is shaping up to be overall relatively positive and aligned with where the city's going in terms of its new structure plans.
It may be a bit early today, but tomorrow may reveal.
It's coming back to council to make any decision.
I just want to skip on that one for obvious reasons. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Mark, please.
Thank you. Look, in the word meow, asking for a friend, but what's the latest on the cat ban with appeals and environment courts, etc.?
So that is still with the Environment Court as part of the Amberfield consent process.
Right, so they're appealing, is that right?
Again, I might hand over to Luke to
Hospital
answer
pass,
that.
you make a great insight.
Stay there, Luke.
Councillor Bunting and others. The court issued an interim decision at the end of last year, and it upheld the need for a cat ban. That was the relief that was sought by the Department of Conservation and some other environment groups. So that's included in the interim decision, and it would be effectively looking to register that against covenants on titles that would be subdivided as part of that proposal. But the interim decision is still being worked through. The parties have until March to respond to the interim decision, and we'll wait and see what the applicant has to say about that. But at this point, it's going back to court for final determination.
So,
I have visions of that saying, it's like herding cats.
Yeah.
Coming.
pretty much. Well, I mean, as the agency who's likely to be required to enforce such a ban, do we have a position on that? I guess, are we involved in that, or?
Yes, we do, and we didn't support a cat ban because of the very difficult and practically challenging implementation obligations that sat with us. That was tabled in the evidence of Hamilton City Council staff. The judge was persuaded by other evidence on that matter.
All right, thanks for that all.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Kesh now. Shh, stop talking about cats over there. Okay, Councillor Kesh, then Councillor Sarah. Kesh,
Thank you. Just a question, page 117 regarding the Waikato River Bridge and Ring Road extension. Can I clarify? It says that there's one dedicated lane in each direction just for buses. Is it a bus lane or is it a transit lane where you have your T2 and T3 vehicles?
It can be anything the council wants it to be. That was the intent behind the bridge design, to preserve and maximise flexibility. I think there's still 2.5 years to go on the construction. That is something that staff will be looking to engage councillors on, just in terms of what happens on that bridge. I think there's definitely an opportunity to have it as a transit lane or a bus lane, but I think that decision needs to be taken in terms of council's overall future bus network in the broader area and how that integrates with the cities. So that's a discussion that's definitely coming to this chambers. But the bridge itself can accommodate any decisions you wish to make in that space.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kesh. Councillor Sarah, her second question.
Thank you. My question was just around the alignment between resource consent applications and the structure plan, which is still under development. What impact is that going to have, given that stage 1 of Peacock sounds like is almost already had all its applications either in or they're coming in? Does that mean we kind of miss the boat a bit in terms of influencing those developments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, but Councillor Thompson. Look, the reality is the resource consents that have been, any resource consents that have been issued by Hamilton City Council under the existing planning rules, that is the framework as it currently stands. The Amberfield matter is, as he knows, under appeal, and hopefully a final determination on that will be issued in the first half of this year. That is the authorised consent that provides legal rights to that landowner to undertake development in accordance with that resource consent. And that resource consent would exist in to some degree of time beyond whatever revised planning framework gets issued as a result of the update to the structure plan. Given the size and scale of the Western Lee project and the discussions that we're having with them at the moment, my own view is that I think they would be looking to reconsent to provide further alignment with the new direction and the new framework that we're producing, which we've briefed you on. We're talking about 1,000 houses there. It can't easily be delivered in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, possibly even 5 to 10. I think that there's a high degree of alignment between the direction that you've articulated to us throughout the development of the structure plan and what they want to achieve. I think there's significant opportunities for developers who have already consented but not built to revisit those schemes and look to reconsent them again to reflect more broadly what we're going to achieve through this revised structure plan.
And will they be put off by the cost or potential delay of reconsenting, or do you think there's enough time between now and when they can actually start building that they don't see that as an issue?
I think they'll make commercial decisions, and those decisions will be informed by the opportunities that will be presented by the new structure plan around density, around better environmental quality, which will distinguish those sites in the market compared to the rest of Hamilton. And equally, given for something like Western Link, which might have up to a 10-year horizon, reconsenting is actually a very, very small thing for them to do in the overall rollout of their development program.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Just to wrap up, I've got a couple of questions. Actually, one going back to the early point, breaking my own rule. Karen, the timing of the answer on the if we get an if for that, is the government or Crown Infrastructure Partners aware of the real need to have it in time to factor that into our LTP, to have the answer to that? So that we, because it makes a big difference to our debt to revenue ratio,
Yes.
which is a key point of in the LTP financial planning.
Yes. Yes. However, at this point, we just need to get the concept over the line, and then we need to take the next step in terms of working out that detail and making it happen. Blair, what's your feeling on that question?
Look, we've impressed upon all those stakeholders both the achievability but also the timeframes here. So, but I think Karen's absolutely right. We've just got to work with the process as quickly as we can. They will have their own speed, and certainly every opportunity that we have, including when the Mayor met last week with Minister Robertson as part of the Metro meeting. This sort of thing was talked about. So I think we're using every opportunity to impress upon all the key agencies' timeframes here.
Yeah, I'd be looking for something a little more specific, that we actually put something in writing to them to that effect, A, and B, that our own staff prepare 2 financial scenarios to go into the LTP. One may be at the last minute a switch of the 120 million. If we could do that, so that we can be really nimble when it finally gets to a decision point, but also that we make it really clear, not just generally in chats with ministers, that we put it in writing to the people that's when we need an answer by before June the 30th, that's for sure.
Okay.
So,
I've noted that down as an action.
Thanks. The other one, I just maybe to Andrew, whether staff had, having been through the big new roundabout on State Highway 3, Halpa Road there, whether staff would consider entering it in the competition for New Zealand's largest roundabout. It's a massive thing. Have any of you seen it? Yeah. It's a monument.
We're proud. Yeah, we're very, very, very proud of that. So but the size is a testament to the environmental outcomes and the walking and cycling provisions that go through the centre of it. It really is.
We need a bus just to take people around it. Okay, councillors, sorry for introducing that note of levity. We'll go back to the recommendation, which I'll move, and seconded by Councillor Bunting on page 109 there. We'll take a show of hands. Those in favour, please raise their hands. That's unanimous, thanks very much. Councillors, given that I've not been notified of any particular issues with the GM's report, and that's the rule. Eh?
Can we have morning tea?
No, I'm going to move that so that I can't be notified before that the staff recommendation be adopted, seconded by Councillor Ryan. If you'd like to make a speech on that, you can, but we're not opening up any issues.
Procedurally, I'm happy with that process. As long as we have the opportunity to pre-warn that we'll ask, then I'm prepared to adopt it, right? That's
yes,
cool. If I'm not,
you're cool. Always at liberty to do that, because I said that in each of the last 4 meetings. But you're also at liberty to follow up with the General Manager or her staff, or their staff, any of the points that are in here too.
But in adopting it, obviously I've had an opportunity to have input and ask questions, which I not in this case take, so that's fine.
The word adopting is wrong, it's receiving.
Receiving, yeah, yes. That's fine.
Okay, so those in favour of the recommendation, please raise their hands. That's unanimous. only just from Ryan. He's a bit iffy about that. Okay, councillors, I'll move that the final resolution that we exclude the public, and then we'll go into that. So I've moved that. Ryan seconded it. Those in favour raise their hand. Against, that's carried. Councillors, we'll come back at 25 to 12.